Welcome in, everybody. Happy New Year to everybody who's watching. I hope it's going well for you. Today we are here for another lesson, and today we are going to talk about addition of fractions. So yes, we are going to add fractions together. We will start with our very first example here. I'm going to show you a common mistake that people make. So let's say we have 2/3 plus 5/6. You have 2/3 and 5/6. A lot of people make this mistake. They think that all you do is add the numerator and denominator together, so they think you would get something like 7/9. That is not correct. That actually is not how you do fractions, especially when you have two different denominators. When you have two different denominators, what you got to do is you have to get them to be the same denominator, which is called the least common denominator, the LCD. How do you get the LCD? You find the least common multiple of the denominators. Well, with this particular one, we know 3 is a factor of 6, so 6 is the least common multiple for both. So what you're going to do, we know 5/6 already is at the least common multiple. But what about 2/3? We need to make 3 into 6. How do we do that? We multiply 3 by 2. So you'll have 3 times 2. But what you do to the denominator, you must do to the numerator. So you'll have to take that 2 and multiply that by 2 also. So that'll give you 2 times 2 is 4. Over 3 times 2, which is 6. That'll give you 4/6 plus 5/6. And now you may add your fractions. Once you have the same denominator, you may add your fractions, which will give you 9/6. But we know with these you can reduce a common 3 out of 9 and 6. Both of them have 3 as a factor. So we will do 3 times 3 over 3 times 2. Common 3 factors out, and then your final answer is going to be 3/2. So that's how you would solve adding fractions. We got more examples here. Always got to put your final answer in simplest form. Alright, what do we got here? We have 4/5 plus 7/10. Alright, so we got 4/5 plus 7/10. So we cannot quite add them yet because we don't have a least common denominator. But we can see that 5 is a factor of 10, so it looks like 10 would be your least common denominator. So how we make that 5 into a 10, that denominator become a 10? You got to multiply it by 2. So that's going to be equal to 4 over 5 times 2, but what you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. You multiply that 4 by 2 also. And then the 7/10 is already in its form with the least common denominator. So then you multiply 4 times 2, you'll get 8. And then 5 times 2 is 10. So you'll have 8/10 plus 7/10. Which if you add them together now, since they have the same denominator, you can go ahead and add them. That will give you 15/10. But it's not yet in its simplest form. 15/10 has a common 5 from them. So if you take them both, you divide by 5 or you factor out a common 5, you will get 5 times 3 over 5 times 2. Which then you factor out your common 5, your final answer is 3/2. So there's that answer. Alright, we have another one here. We have 3/4 plus 1/12. So 3/4 plus 1/12. Well, again, we can't just add the fractions yet. We need a common denominator. We know 4 is a factor of 12, so that least common denominator is in fact going to be 12. So in order to turn the 4 into a 12, we have to multiply by 3. So you'll have 3 times 3, because what you do to the denominator, you got to do the numerator, over 4 times 3 plus 1/12. The 12 is already in the least common denominator form for the 1/12, which 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 3 is 12. You'll end up having 9/12 plus 1/12, which once you get to that form, since they both have 12 as a denominator, you can go ahead and add them. 9 plus 1 is 10. You'll have 10/12. But the 10 and 12, we can factor out a common 2 from them. So if we do that, you'll have 2 times 5 over 2 times 6, because 2 goes into 10 5 times, 2 goes into 12 6 times. So you factor out the common 2, you're left with your final answer of 5/6. And that would be the answer for that. Alright, we have 3/10 plus 1/100th. So how are we going to solve that one? Well, we see 10 is in fact a factor of 100, so we can use 100 as our least common denominator. So we need to turn that 10 denominator into 100. So what you're going to do is going to be 10 times 10 in the denominator, but again, what you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator. That would also be 3 times 10 plus 1 over 100, because the 1 over 100 is already in the least common denominator form for that. So what you have next is 3 times 10 is 30 over 10 times 10, which is 100. You'll end up with 30/100ths plus 1/100th. Which, now that they both have the same denominator, you can add them together, which would end up giving you 31/100ths. And 31 does not factor out of 100. They don't factor at all from each other, so that's in its simplest form. 31/100ths would be your answer. Alright, I got 2 of a little bit harder type. Let's say we have something like 1/6 plus 3/4. So you'll have 1/6 plus 3/4. Well, here's the problem. 4 is not a factor of 6. Well, in order to get the least common denominator, what you need to do is find the least common multiple of 4 and 6. So we'll do that real quick. Least common multiples of 4. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12. Then of 6. 6 times 1 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. Well, hold it right there. We got our least common multiple, which will be our least common denominator, 12. So it looks to be that your least common denominator is going to be equal to 12. We'll write that on the side to aid us in that. That'll aid us there. So, in order to turn these denominators into 12, we start with the 6. In order to turn 6 into 12, we got to multiply by 2. So you'll have the denominator of 6 times 2, and then what you do to the denominator, you must also do to the numerator. So you multiply that 1 times 2, and now we got to deal with the 3/4. In order to turn 4 into 12, you got to multiply that by 3. So you'll have 4 times 3 in your denominator, but what you do to the denominator, you got to do the numerator. You'll have 3 times 3 in the numerator, which now if we do the multiplication, 1 times 2 is 2, 6 times 2 is 12. For the next term, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 3 is 12. So now you're left with 2 twelfths plus 9 twelfths. Since they have the same denominator, you can go ahead and add them, which will give you 11 twelfths. And you can't reduce it any further. 11 twelfths would actually be your final answer. Alright, I got one more. We have 1/18 plus 7 twelfths. Alright, 1/18 plus 7 twelfths. Well, 12 is not a factor of 18, so we need to go ahead and find our least common multiple, which would make that the least common denominator. So least common multiple of 12 is going to be 12 times 1 is 12, 12 times 2 is 24, 12 times 3 is 36, least common multiple of 18, 18 times 1 is 18, 18 times 2 is 36. Well, stop right there. We found our least common multiple. So that means your least common denominator is going to equal 36. We'll put that off to the side so we know what we need to turn these denominators into. Okay. So in order to turn 18 into 36, we have to multiply that by 2. So you're going to have 18 times 2 for your denominator. You'll have 1 times 2 for your numerator, since you have to do it to the numerator also. And then to deal with your 7 twelfths term, in order to turn 12 into 36, you have to multiply that by 3. So that'll be 12 times 3. That'll actually also be 7 times 3, since you have to do it to the numerator. So we work through the multiplication here. 1 times 2 is 2. 18 times 2 is 36. 7 times 3 is 21. And then 12 times 3 is 36. Alright, now that they both have the same denominator, we can go ahead and take care of this and add it. So the denominator is going to be 36. The numerator, 2 plus 21, is 23. And in fact, we're at our final answer in simplest form because we cannot factor it any further. So your answer is 23/36. So, biggest thing, again, to recap what we've just watched, what we've just learned, if you have two fractions, they both have to have the least common denominator. Which means they both have to have the same number as the denominator for each term. If you can spot one number being a factor of the other, then the bigger number of the two is your least common denominator. If neither number is a factor of each other, then you got to find the least common multiple of those two numbers, and the least common multiple of those two numbers is your least common denominator. So that's really all there is to it. Tomorrow we'll be doing a similar lesson, only it'll be subtraction of fractions. I hope everyone has a safe and happy new year. Take care.